My name is Kate. Looking back on the pandemic, it was so shocking. I think a lot of us have trouble now actually remembering it because it was such a strange time, especially very early on when it was just dreadful news, climbing numbers, and we being told to stay indoors. This is, I think, where social media can be a good thing in that enable people to still connect and I heard about this photography project and it just was something I thought, well, that's just interesting. It's just interesting. It's just an interesting thing to do because we had so few interesting things to do then. When I was photographed, I was wearing my most glamorous gardening gear because, like a lot of people, spent a lot of time gardening. Luckily, we had a very nice summer. I grew food and handed it over the fence to my neighbour and lots of flowers. Spent a lot of time, just tilling the earth, and as a lot of new gardeners did, I have been gardening for many years, but just being outside, just connecting with things and just watching nature get on with itself was very calming. After a while, gardening wasn't enough, and I felt I needed to do something, and during the pandemic there were quite a lot of volunteering opportunities, and Age UK is just around the corner from where I live. And so I started volunteering for them. So I was queuing up at Sainsbury or Tesco doing weekly shops for people, which again, that's one of those things you think back and you cannot, it just sounds like it's just an extraordinary thing to remember. Queues and queues of people in a queue around a car park just trying to get into the supermarket. And I did that, and I also helped with the meal delivery service. And then later, when things were getting a bit more optimistic and the vaccination centre opened, I volunteered there. And really both of those things were just great. It meant I could get out of the house and do something useful. Other than that, I had just moved down to Folkestone in 2019, just before, like 6 months before the pandemic hit. And I just started to meet people and start building a circle of acquaintances, make friendships, social networks, whatever you want to call it. It did feel like the rug had been pulled completely out from under my feet when we were told we all had to stay indoors and not see anybody else. And I have got family in Folkestone, but again, I was sat on the sofa in the early days and just cried. I thought, I'm just going to be on my own all the time. And much as I love my own company, my partner still lives in London, so it was just looking at a very, indefinite, at that time, of course, we didn't know if it ever would end, an indefinite period of just being on your own. And I know people now are still recovering from that, and I felt so terribly sorry for people, some of whom I delivered food to, who were shielding, even worse, and probably still are, a lot of them, because they had complex health issues. I just can't imagine how those people got through it. Think back, I think, the volunteering really helped and the gardening, but it does, yes, every now and again I think back to the things that happened. The earliest days, again, the panic buying, people, toilet roll wars, and just awful things really. And then everybody standing on their steps clapping. That was kind of weird as well after a while. At the time, I felt it's not like they chose the pandemic to happen. I don't know whether anybody can know whether another party, another bunch of people might have done better. And we had to trust them. We had our government and the BBC and we had to trust both of those, and obviously one was using the other to talk to us all every night. And at the time, certainly in the beginning, I remember actually just before we were told to stay indoors, my partner and I went to Budapest for a long weekend. As it turned out, the last long weekend anybody was going to spend there because they literally closed the Hungarian border the day we flew out. And just before, we were all being told to wash our hands, and it wasn't being taken very seriously at all. And then we went to Hungary and people were walking around in masks and they were saying, well, it was empty because of the pandemic, and we didn't really we just hadn't really taken it in. And then, as I say, they closed their borders. They didn't allow anybody in after we left the country, and we came back here, and it was, I think, a couple of weeks later that it actually really locked down. And then it became very, very serious. And now, of course, we all have the benefit of hindsight, and you think, what were they playing at? What were they thinking? Just telling us to wash our hands and carry on as normal. But this disease was killing people, thousands of people in the end. Again, with hindsight, I don't think they did a brilliant job then. And then, of course, we had people flouting the rules they were telling us all to follow. What's his face? The political advisor who drove to Barnard Castle to test his eyesight. It was very much one rule for them and another for everybody else. And I am very fortunate in that I was not touched as badly as many people were. I didn't lose anybody to this dreadful disease, but I can imagine how furious people are. People who couldn't be with their loved ones. And meanwhile, they're having parties. And the other thing that makes me even certainly as angry, is that they made so much money out of it. Their friends all got awarded contracts for PPE, which half the time was not fit for purpose. So many, I don't think we know the full scale of it, but there's certainly been a lot of money going into pockets very close to people who were making the decisions about where that money should go. And now, and since, obviously, the former Prime Minister has been charged with all, again, there's lots of investigations, we've heard a lot of stuff. I'm sure there's more dirt to come out. There was so much money wasted. We always knew we were going to pay for it. You have to give them credit for that, I think. So much money was wasted. And a lot of it was about posturing and saying the right things, saying that they were delivering boxes and boxes, thousands of boxes, container loads of PPE. And it was rubbish. It wasn't the right stuff. It was all about, aren't we great? Aren't we wonderful? Aren't we saviours? Here we are saving the nation. Like I say, I don't know how another mob would have performed, but probably the same things would have had to be addressed, the same problems gotten over, maybe not with so much cynical behaviour. I can't wait for them to get a right kicking, and I really hope they do. I just am starting to lose faith in the voters in this country, but I sincerely hope they have the sense to boot this lot out. Otherwise, it's like rewarding bad behaviour. Oh, you were really naughty, but we'll put you back in power again. So yeah, angry about that. I find I don't go out as much as I used to. I've lost the habit. And actually this last few months, for the first time, I have been going to busy things. The first time I went to a concert at the Leescliffe Hall with, thousands of other people, I did feel a little bit nervous. I did feel very conscious of the fact that I was in a sweaty environment with a lot of people who might very possibly have at least a bad cold. And then I did go to a silent disco at a nightclub in Folkestone and promptly got the most awful cold I couldn't get shot off for months. I'm conscious when I'm going to that sort of environment, but it's not stopping me do it. It's just I would never have thought about it before. I didn't think, there's a lot of people here. It's very hot and sweaty. I'm just conscious of those things. I don't go shopping as much as I used to. I do what I have to. I don't tend to go into town every Saturday to wander around. I've just got out of the habit, I think. But I did after the pandemic. When the rest of the country were coming out of the lockdown as well, I was going into another one because I had to have, as it turned out, I had to have 2 knee replacements. So we got to probably about March that year, and I literally couldn't walk, so I was stuck in the house. And everybody else was coming out of it and masks coming off and social distancing was a thing of the past. And I remember when I finally was able to get out, it really shocked me. The first time I went into a shop and people weren't consciously steering 2 metres away from each other. I was really quite taken aback, and then I realised they're not breaking any rules. Those rules they're over. And I'd seen it on the news, but I was that bit behind. I was about 6 weeks behind everybody else because I hadn't literally been out. and so, yeah, again, I think maybe that's why it's still, even now, I'm quite conscious of how close people are to me. And I used to live in London where you have considerably less space between you and the next person. And in normal times down here in Folkestone, that distance between you and the next person has always been greater. But I'm really conscious of it now, how close people are standing to me. But aside from that, I think most people, it's almost like, it's like a bad dream that we're all not even sure happened. It really feels that weird. You think, and I've lost time. I can't remember what year things happened in. I can remember 2019 because I moved down here, and then I think, yes, the pandemic was the year after that. But it was such a strange time with so few markers in it, the usual things that happen. You know, we didn't have all the big events. All we had was dreadful news and nothing else for months and months and months. It was really strange. It's like, what's the word, a long coon, like a gap, big hole. Very odd.